Welcome to the podcast. This is Challenging Leadership, and I'm Stephen Mather.
And I'm Jared Scott.
Great to have you with us today. So, Jared, today is my choice, my pick, and I just wanted to do something a bit, I suppose, less serious, but actually dealing with some pretty big themes. So it's really the leadership that we see on film and television. And I'm particularly interested in Star Trek because I've always been a big Star Trek fan.
You've got a fan on the other side of the pond with you on that.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I don't know, universally loved, perhaps not, but it is loved by loads and loads of people. So yeah, I think hopefully a lot of our audience will remember some of the episodes and relate to it. And you've also got a couple of examples from other TV and film, which is really good because I think that would be good to explore those. So we'll keep those hidden. Stay tuned, folks. That's coming up. Okay, so shall I kick off? As it was
go right ahead.
My idea. By the way, by the time people listen to this, it'll be out of date. But happy Thanksgiving to you, Jared.
Thank you very much.
It is tomorrow, isn't it? As we record, it is Thanksgiving.
I'm going to stuff myself with turkey tomorrow.
And then do it all again about a month later. Yeah.
That's right. Well, we like to hurt ourselves with food sometimes.
Cool. So there was one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that I have always sort of gone back to as some really good examples of leadership, and I kind of want to do a training course about it at some point. I might do it just as a sort of standalone thing, maybe online. But I think there's one particular episode. But I guess there's a wider question about leadership in Star Trek. There's numerous captains that we've seen over the years. Obviously, Captain Kirk was the original, I guess, swashbuckling sort of leader that young boys would probably look up to. I know I did. Spock is a leader in himself, actually, and I think he's an interesting leader character. Then, obviously, we've got Jean-Luc Picard, who's the Next Generation captain. We've got Captain Janeway, first woman captain. Yeah. We've got Sisko, who I find to be one of the most interesting characters from Deep Space Nine. And then, we've got the later iteration. We've got Archer, who's from Enterprise. And then I think the later iterations of Star Trek, probably the Captain Pike resurrection of him is probably the most interesting from a leadership perspective as a kind of good example. But I'm going to focus on Picard and a particular episode. So the episode is in season 2 of The Next Generation, and it's called Pen Pals. Nothing good came out of season 1 apart from the show itself, I guess.
I'm shocked we're going to the early episodes to talk about this because I try to forget about season 1 and season 2 a little bit.
Yeah, season 2 it started to get better. Season 3 and 4, absolutely, they're humming at that point. But this particular one, it's quite late on in season 2, actually. So it's called Pen Pals, and I'll just give you a quick overview of the story because actually leadership is the theme that is threaded throughout the whole thing. The title Pen Pals doesn't really give that away, but it really is about leadership. The whole episode is about leadership at different levels. The setting the scene, the story is that they go to investigate a planet that's being destroyed through natural processes, something to do with a star, and it's creating these gravitational forces that are destroying the planet. And of course, in Star Trek, they have this thing called the Prime Directive, which is basically you shouldn't interfere in other planets' development, even if that means saving them. It's a kind of playing God thing. And so they've learned over the years that they shouldn't do that basically each planet has to make its own development. Once they get to warp capacity, then it's seen as, okay, now they're joining the family of the interstellar community. Now we can talk to them, but up until that point they're supposed to keep away. So they find that there is actually people living there, and Data ends up talking to this little girl who she just basically gets on her little radio and says, "Is there anybody out there?" And Data answers yes, and they then talk. So these are the pen pals. It's Data and this little girl who he becomes friends with, and he talks to her, and she comes to sort of rely on him in some ways, which is quite sweet. But of course, this means he's broken the Prime Directive, and now he wants Captain Picard, and basically he's asking for the Enterprise to intervene and save this planet. So that's the story. It's all around that. But then there's this B plot that's going on at the same time, which is my original interest in this, which is around Wesley Crusher. Now, I think most Star Trek fans have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this character. He's not the most loved character, the young boy who is a bit irritating, particularly in season 1.
Hey, I liked him when I was a kid, and then I rewatched the episodes a few years ago. I was like, I can't stand him. So it changed with me.
Yeah, I suppose that's it. And I mean, obviously, as he grows up as an actor, the character becomes more interesting. In the early days, he was slightly just an irritating boy, but I guess it was a route in for people like you and me as kids watching it. It was, we sort of imagine ourselves as him, although I don't think I ever really liked him. But anyway, as he's getting older now, they're starting to talk about him, and he's clearly a prodigy. He's earmarked for great things in Starfleet. And so what we see in this episode is we see, first of all, what I think is a really good meeting. So there is a meeting where Picard and Riker come in the meeting room, and all the other senior team are there. And so Picard says, this is Riker's meeting. Basically, he's going to take charge of this meeting. So Riker takes charge of the meeting. He owns the meeting. He explains that he's been charged with the development of Wesley Crusher. His mum's away, so this is the season where Gates McFadden got sacked and then came back a season later. But so in the story, she's away and he's on his own, really. So Riker's been given this responsibility, and he says to everybody, right, it's my responsibility, but I'm looking for some advice and some feedback from you as a senior team about how we develop this young man into, ultimately becoming an officer. And they have a really adult conversation in this meeting about how they want to develop this guy, this young man. There's the possibility that he's going to be given, and he eventually is given charge of a mission, essentially, and he's going to be given that job to do. But they're discussing whether that's the right time for him. He's still only a young man. Does he have the skills? Is he going to knock his confidence if it doesn't work? There's a lot of discussion around that. And then Pulaski, who's the doctor for this season, she sort of says, well, let's just make sure we're talking about the same thing here. Are we talking about developing a Starfleet officer, or are we talking about guiding a young man into adulthood? And Troy actually quite directly contradicts her and says, you actually can't do that. You can't develop somebody into an adult. They have to do that themselves, and they have to learn themselves. And Pulaski responds with, I totally agree with that, but I'm just concerned that we're not, basically setting him up to fail at such an early age. And I just thought that's a great meeting. That's the sort of meetings we want in the workplace where, first of all, the leadership's great in the meeting. It's a clear goal. This is what we want to achieve from this meeting. And that comes from Riker. And then there's open discussion, people putting their own opinions forward about whether he's ready or not, what the risks are. Pulaski brings up quite a contentious point. Troy disagrees with her, but nobody's getting upset. Nobody's getting angry and defensive, and they're just talking to each other like grown-ups. Mm-hmm. And I just think if you want to see a good lesson of what a meeting should look like, I mean, there's a few slightly hammy lines in it as far as dialogue is concerned, but sure. I thought that was a really good example of a meeting. I don't know if you remember that particular episode, Jared.
I briefly remember that. I mean, I'm not trying to say I wipe all those episodes away, but I do appreciate. I think Jean-Luc showed some definite leadership, but also maybe that fatherly figure for Wesley. There was a couple episodes I think where they were stranded in a cave, and the Captain Picard was injured, and he gave, it was an opportunity for him to
That's right.
grow as he did, So I'm
Yeah.
terrible with remembering episode names. So you're like, yeah, that episode.
Me too. I wrote it down because I can't
Yeah,
remember them.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think I mean Picard's really interesting in this episode because in a way he's the A plot. So that's
Mhm.
the B plot is Wesley's development as a leader. He gets to become the leader of that mission, and I'll come back to that. But the A plot is really about how Picard deals with this situation where Data has essentially broken the rules.
Mhm.
Um, interesting sort of side point is that Picard obviously works really hard. He doesn't get much leisure time, so he goes on the holodeck and wants to do some riding. He's got a horse there, and he's just about to get on it, and He gets disturbed first, and then he's back on it again a bit later in the show, and Data turns up to talk to him, basically to explain to him what he's done.
Mhm.
And I think another great example there of leadership is the way that Picard responds to that. So this poor guy was just getting out on his horse for a little bit of R&R, and he's then interrupted again, this time by Data admitting he's done this thing that really he shouldn't have done. And I just love
Mhm.
the way that Picard deals with that. He doesn't shout at him. He doesn't get angry with him. He just asks him questions. Okay, tell me what happens. We're going to have to do something about this. Your communication has to stop, but we need to now decide what we're going to do. And again, Picard gets the senior team around, and not for the first time in this episode, or not for the last time in this episode, they have a conversation about, right, does the Prime Directive apply in this case? Should we look at breaking the rule of the Prime Directive, actually, because it's unethical? And they have different opinions. There's a little bit of aggravation during this meeting, I think, but still, it's handled in a very, very adult way. So again, I think that's a really great example of leadership. It's the last thing you wanted, but actually you're dealing with something now that someone's come to you to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I have I looked at each captain for
Okay,
what they were able to do, but the Captain Picard, I guess the one that stood out to me is the Measure of a Man,
right.
and to me that showcased a lot of different avenues of leadership, and
Mm,
just kind of like a plot summary. Basically, it's a court case where Jean-Luc is representing Data,
yeah.
and then of course uh, Riker has to represent Maddox, the
Mm,
opposition, and it's interesting in a lot of ways because of the fact that Picard was so committed to ethics and justice, and you saw that throughout most every episode. There was some underlying subplot of him showcasing that, which is very admirable in a leader.
mm,
But the thing that caught me was the fact that you have somebody that he's in charge of in two cases. Here he's responsible for both Riker and Data, and but it's different. Like there's a degree of emotional intelligence that he has to display, and not letting his feelings overwhelm the logical progression of the case,
mm,
because you've got somebody basically, you could say, Riker, why aren't you, why would you do that, and instead realizing he's got to do what he's got to do in this case because he was picked by a superior.
yeah.
And then also when we have people that we are in charge of in a department or in a company, that leadership of, do we have that passion to want to defend and support the people that work with us and for us? Because I mean, he could have very easily just discarded him. I know that would have ruined the whole plot, but it showed a side of him because here,
Mm,
he is a he is. I'm not going to say and get attacked by the Trekkie saying he's not a living being, but that was the whole premise of it. It's like
yeah, yeah.
it's people say, oh, he's just a cyborg.
Mm.
or an android is the proper term. But anyway, I was reflecting on that episode. And it made me just think about how many times in life when you're faced with situations where you have somebody in a higher position having certain expectations that perhaps you don't agree with, and you have to decide: am I going to defend my employees, or am I going to just throw them to the wolves, or am I
Mm.
just going to become passive? And you saw that he was anything but passive in this. He was very, very much defending Data.
Absolutely. I mean, he puts his career on the line, doesn't he? He basically
Yeah,
says, "No, I know you're my superior officer, but
yeah,
I'm going to take this further up, and whatever happens will happen." He just simply cannot do that unethical thing. He has to stick up for what he knows is right. A very admirable quality, of course.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have a cousin. He actually was in a situation where he was asked to do some things that were unethical,
Mm.
and it cost him his career. He got another job, but imagine going, I'm going to do what's right,
Yeah.
and this means that perhaps my family is going to have a dad that doesn't have a job right now,
Mm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it just made me think about there's so many moral quandaries that we face, and you see so many times a failure of leadership because they tend to look out for their own skin first. I'm not saying
Yeah.
all the time, but and again, you look at Captain Picard; he did not look out for his own skin,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting because you can get yourself into a lot of trouble sometimes by supporting people that really maybe we're blinded. Our loyalty can blind us to the fact that no, maybe you shouldn't be defending them. Maybe the higher ups are right. So there's always a balance when it comes to
Yeah,
these.
I think it's really important to be able to, and I think as you get older, you become a bit more confident in yourself. Clearly, I guess you should,
Hmm.
hopefully, in that you are willing to stand up for things, and actually have the confidence to say, yeah, I'm not going to follow that directive, or that's not what I'm going to do. I mean, I've had situations in the past where I felt compromised in a less serious way. It's not been a case of doing anything unethical per se, but just kind of I suppose compromising to a degree that I didn't want to about what I think is important. So in a role going back many years now, I was a leadership and management trainer. Well, I was the training and development manager, and part of that role was to train leaders and managers. And my particular manager got made redundant. I ended up with another manager who really didn't understand what we did there at all. And she was of the school that only the senior leadership team are leaders. And so when we talked about leadership and management, she didn't want that to be the name of our first line management course, because they're not leaders. The senior leadership team are leaders, and everybody else are supervisors or whatever. Well, I mean, the irony is that they actually had the job title team leader, so it just didn't make any sense whatsoever. And I remember having a very uncomfortable conversation trying to explain that to her, but she wasn't going to have it.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I don't know whether this was the right thing to do or not, but I just basically completely ignored her. So I didn't.
Maybe. I,
I thought, well, if she really feels that strongly about it, she's going to have to come down to my office and change all the titles for these courses, and I don't think she can be bothered to do that. So I thought I'm just going to ignore her and do what I think is right, and it never came back and bit me. It was just one of those things. I thought, well, there's no point arguing with her because she's not going to change her mind. I've explained logically why she's wrong. Um,
mm,
and I, I've stuck to that belief. But that was a really important thing to me because that was in a way, the whole thrust of the program was. Sure, you're not going to be making strategic level leadership decisions like a senior leader might, but you still have a leadership role. If you're managing 30 people on a production line, then there is leadership there. It's hard to do that job. You want people to do it the right way. You've got goals, you've got KPIs you want people to achieve.
mm,
You need some leadership skills in order to achieve that, in my view. So, yeah. So that was one example, I suppose. But yeah, I've never had quite the same level of decision to make. That I might lose my job from it.
Yeah, that's very realistic, though, isn't it? I mean,
Mm.
definitely there are individuals who get caught up in just one word,
Yeah,
and then it's like, wow, it's mind-boggling. And as a leader, we have to be able to push past that. Or what I say is sometimes you have to isolate the problem and just put it over there in the corner and
mm.
ignore it,
Yeah,
keep it away from damaging
exactly.
the rest.
Exactly, which is what I did. I thought, she's not going to sack me for that, and the programs were so well appreciated by the business that I thought, there's just no way that she's going to take it any further. But I thought I just don't feel right just laying that down, because it made me feel like everything I taught the learners was I was going back on that. It was almost like I didn't believe that anymore, and I
Yeah.
couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we like Jean Luc, and the other element of the Pen Pals episode that I wanted to feature was Wesley's um, learning process. So one of the things he was asked to do was, he was asked to take command of this small team. They were all older than him. So this is something I've talked about on my channel before, particularly for young managers. Sometimes that can be very difficult. Young leaders who are being asked to take charge of a team where most of them are older, that can be sometimes intimidating. And he felt that. So he goes into the group and he says, right, we've had some pseudoscience, babble about this thing that needs. He thought we needed to have a special type of scan for this particular thing, and one of the guys on the team, older than him, says, "Well, we could do that, but it's really a waste of time. It's not going to tell us anything.
Yeah.
Which is going to be a lot of work, and it's not really going to help us." And he just sort of goes, "Oh, okay," and doesn't say anything. But he's on his mind. He knows that he really wanted that scan doing. So he gets a bit of advice then from Riker. He talks to Riker and he says, what should I do? And they have a bit of a chat. And Riker says, which I always try to live by, what would Picard do? So he said, what
Yep.
would Picard do? And basically he said, well, he'd get the scan because he thinks it's important. And,
Mhm.
so he does. So he goes back to the team and he just says, right, okay, I definitely want that scan doing, please. And the guy goes, okay, you got it. And that's it. And I thought that was great. That was a really great example for young managers and leaders. Sometimes we feel really intimidated and we think it's going to be a big thing and we back down, or we sort of feel like we should back down. But he just assertively said, I need that thing doing. Thank you very much. And they responded exactly as you would expect professionals to, which was, okay, let's do it then. And I think that's a really great learning. That's a great learning example actually for every leader, but particularly young ones. So
Yeah.
that's one. So again, there's a little example of leadership. So I think that episode, if anybody watches that again with those goggles on about leadership, that's what it's
Mhm.
all about. From Picard to Wesley to Riker, and all of the other senior team. I think it's a great example.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
what other leaders do we like? And you've got a bit of some others that I think sound great.
Oh,
Talk
well, I
about.
mean, actually, I wanted to stay on Picard just one
Okay,
more
go for
thing,
it.
and I want to be negative.
Okay.
I hope that we don't have a huge allegiance to him because it might be, but his relationship with the Borg, right? That was interesting to me. But do you remember he let the one Borg go back to his ship,
Mm,
and they could have literally put a virus in him that would have destroyed the whole collective. And of course, then we wouldn't have any mention of Borg. I mean, the writers are probably, well, we can't do that because then there'd be no other episodes about the Borg. And I loved any episode with the Borg was
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
My brother used to make like stuff out of Legos and act like he was one of the Borg. And anyway, so we got a little crazy with that. But he was so tied to his moral compass
Mm,
that he's like, no, it's a living being. And so, and he probably had no idea the repercussions of that decision would lead to. I mean, if you watch the latest series, Picard, he still struggles. There's
mm,
still a connection there, right? There's
yeah,
this His plots, I mean, it's brilliant by the writers because they can keep going back to the Borg when they
Mm.
lose interest with the fans. But just from the simplicity of this was a real event, it shows that even our best laid interest in thinking about how we want to stick to the way we like to do things, that consistency and leadership, won't always bring the results that we're looking for. And it may not be an immediate repercussion, but it could happen to us down the road where we think what we're doing with our team or our department is great, and it's initially you're taking care of the surface, but underneath it, there's another problem that's brewing that's not being taken care of. So
Mm.
I don't have to go super deep into it, but it was just more about his best qualities actually allowed something to happen that wasn't necessarily so good.
It's interesting that, I mean, it's similar to the decision that Captain Janeway makes at the beginning of Voyager, isn't it?
Yeah.
Should she that they choose to destroy that array that was basically the way they could get back home to Earth, but that would mean abandoning the people there that were being attacked by this other group. So she felt a responsibility towards them, but it wasn't really anything to do with her. But she just found herself in that position. It meant that all her crew had to then spend 5 years, whatever,
Yeah.
getting back home again. Yeah, interesting. But it's that moral dilemma there, isn't it? Should
It is.
what is the right thing to do? It's not always easy. Mm.
No, I mean, or even the one where Kirk he basically marooned Khan and
Yeah,
his, and I'm like, that was in the original series, and then one of the greatest, if not the greatest, movie, Star
Wrath of
Trek: The
Khan.
Wrath of Khan. I
Mm.
mean, so there it came back to bite him, and he lost his basically his
Son.
best friend in
And
death
his
over
son.
that situation, and his son.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Mm.
right. That's kind of like, I don't know, the way they. I'm not to go on a sidetrack here, but it was like, yeah, they killed him, and then it was just, and of course it was his. He had that inner vengeance and everything, but it was just
Mm.
like, wow, look at all the damage that happened because of his
Mm.
decision earlier on, decades before.
Yeah, so I actually, as we're on Kirk, I can't resist it. I yes, I liked the kind of swashbuckling style of Kirk, I suppose, but I was always, I think it's really interesting the way that, I mean, Kirk and Spock are a great foil for each other, clearly, because you've got one with this kind of passion, these human qualities that are applauded in the show, and then you've got Spock, who is kind of like, I suppose, the antithesis of that, and yet they're such good friends. I think it's a great, what a brilliant partnership that has been over the years. But yeah, Kirk took such risks. I mean, some of the episodes, one of the episodes that I noted down was the one where he goes, called A Piece of the Action. It's called. Basically, there's this planet that's become like Chicago in the sort of
Lord
gang
knows
days.
what that
And I mean, his solution to that is to essentially tell them that he was going to become the gang leader, and that he'd come back every so often to collect the the profits from the gang, because that was the only way he could get through to them. So that's why he did it. Another one was a really big episode, which was A Taste of Armageddon, which is where there's this planet that is constantly at war. It's been at war for hundreds of years, but the war is basically, there's a computer that decides how many people and who's going to die, and they just
Yeah.
put them in this booth to kill them. So the actual warfare is finished. Nobody actually fights anymore. They've just assumed that that's going to happen. So the computer then decides on the casualty figures. And it's a brilliant idea. It's an absolutely fantastic allegory for lots of things in the real world. But Kirk recognizes that what's happened is they've sanitized war. They've made war too painless. Although people are dying, that it's being done in such a sanitized way that actually what they need is to understand what war is really like. But the arrogance of a man to go down to another planet and decide, this is the answer, I'm going to destroy your computer and your whole culture that you've had for the last 100 years, and see how you get on, is pretty breathtaking.
Yeah. Oh, oof. Yeah. I'll tell you what, the the writing in the original series, the situations that they dealt with were powerful in
Yeah.
a lot of cases. You had to look past some of the hokiness
Yeah.
and the really bad fighting scripts.
And the stuntmen who look nothing like the actual people
Oh,
fighting.
it's so bad. Thank goodness for 480p, because if they remastered it in high definition, you'd be like, oh boy. But
Yeah.
yeah, as far as I'm actually going to find something good about Captain Kirk. So
Okay,
one
cool.
of my favorite episodes was the city on the edge of forever, and where they have to go back in time, or they go back in time because they're looking after McCoy. They're trying to find him, and they jump through that portal,
Mhm.
and so Spock has to wear the hat to cover up his
Yes,
ears.
the beanie hat. Yeah.
And yeah, it was really cool, but it was like he had to make a difficult decision involving this woman that he fell in love with,
Yeah.
and look out for the greater good of how it would
Mm.
change history if she wasn't hit by that car. And I'm just like, there, because he was going to do everything he could to save a female character in that movie show.
Yeah, that's
He's
the Joan Collins episode, isn't it?
yeah, it
Mm.
is. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that
Yep.
is a good one. That is a very good one. That was one of my favourites. I always like the time traveling ones. There's lots of dilemmas around time. We're getting well away from leadership now, but
I know,
that
I
is
know, I know. Yeah,
one.
but but I circle back to when we talk about real leadership. You have to make those tough
Yeah.
decisions at times where that somebody's getting hurt in this. I'm not talking
Mm.
about physical hurt, obviously, but
Sure.
there's going to be. You have to think about, what if you had to, do a layoff, or
Mm.
you had to promote one person, another person doesn't get promoted, and the other person that did not get promoted has some great skills.
Mm.
It's just there's always decisions that have to be made as a leader, and to be able to detach yourself from the emotional aspect of it. Or one of the ones that I thought about recently, I was listening to an audiobook um, about leadership, and he said that you will sometimes forego the pain of maybe you have to move to get rid of somebody. You'll forgo that pain because you feel for them, and yet you're allowing your entire department to suffer
Mm.
because of that
Mm.
one individual. So it's just
Yeah,
it's the what was the Spock saying, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and
that's
or
right.
the needs of one. And
Mm.
so that's a principle that's really strong, but it can definitely be utilized when it comes to even those of us who are in those positions of leadership that have to make those tough decisions.
It's quite interesting that, Jared, because that's a theme that is throughout the whole of the Star Trek, uh, all of the shows and the films, of course, as well. And there's it's almost like there's a balance there between the logical thing to do, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, but then there's the human thing to do, which is to think about the individual. And actually, at times, you have to make a stand for the individual, and that is explored ad infinitum, really, film after film. And I think it's great. So it's a really interesting question, and trying to get that right is sometimes very difficult.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
I'm going to have to mention Cisco before we move on to
Let's
the
do it.
others.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's
So
go to the
Cisco,
forgotten captain.
well, he is in a way. I mean, when I watched Deep Space Nine for the first time when it was first out, I wasn't. It was my least favorite, I would say. I
Mhm.
think mainly because it was like the first one was boldly going where no one's gone before. The second one was continuing to boldly go where no one had gone before. But Deep Space Nine was sort of boldly staying put and waiting for other people to come to you. And that didn't sound quite as exciting, and it was a lot of politics in it, which I wasn't really into at the time and didn't really understand it. But as time's gone on, I really appreciate that show more and more. And I think Cisco's a really interesting character. But there is a problematic element to Cisco in that his story arc is one that I would recommend no leader to follow, because essentially he starts as a serious Starfleet commander. By the end of it, he's become a religious leader, and a kind of icon of a
Hmm.
whole religious planet. And there's some, without getting too much into it, as you know, we both know,
Yeah.
there's risks associated with allowing yourself to become that sort of guru cult leader. And I think, that's something that I've explored in my work at various times. And in a way, although we very much root for him, he's very much our man, and he shows some fantastic leadership qualities. Ultimately, there's a lesson there I think we don't want to apply. We don't want to become a cult leader as a leader.
Yeah, this is true. Absolutely agree with you 100% on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Cisco was interesting. I don't want to say he did some shady things too, but I think about
Mm.
the murder of the Romulan
Oh,
senator,
yeah.
and then
Such a
um,
great episode, that.
yeah, yeah, I forget, was that in the Pale Moonlight, or I can't
Oh,
remember
I can't
exactly.
remember what that one was called. It could
Yeah,
be. Could
there
be.
was there was a lot of morally complex plots with Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
And but yeah, he was definitely an interesting person. They all have their own little nuances. I can't get into Star Trek Discovery because I act like it doesn't really exist. I don't know why. I just didn't
Mm,
like it,
yeah.
but I'm enjoying getting to know Pike and his leadership qualities
Yeah,
with
I agree. Yeah.
the Strange New Worlds.
It's great.
Because he was barely in the original series,
Yeah,
and
of course.
not
Yeah,
much
yeah.
not much of him there. So, but they're good stuff.
Yeah, I
Well,
think he's a good leader. I think, yeah, just getting, again, going off piece slightly. I think for me, the episodic nature of the earlier Star Treks makes it easier to explore a one particular facet, like leadership or something, or a single dilemma. And I think that's one of the things that we miss when, like, Discovery is very much around that huge story arc that's going to last a whole season.
mhm,
I think, I know that has been the way that series have gone, but I think in Strange New Worlds, I've kind of gone back to, okay, there is this bigger story at the background, but they're very much standalone episodes, which I think helps to isolate these specific questions. So yeah,
yeah,
I tend to agree with you. Yeah.
sure.
Right. What else we got?
Well, do you want to get away from those listeners that are like, I don't like Star Trek?
I think they've already gone, mate. They're gone. But yeah, let's try something different then.
All right. Well, I've got some different characters. We can get into the ones that I say good leadership skills, and then maybe poor leadership skills.
Okay.
And Aragorn for Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
Um, he he showed wisdom, humility, a sense of duty. He was able to rally diverse groups for a central cause, and so I look at that character as somebody that would be an outstanding leader
Yeah.
when it comes to that. So, um, yeah, I hate to say it, I'm the person that, like, I watched the movies but didn't read the books.
Yeah,
So,
me too. I've
um,
never, I read The Hobbit to Celine when she was a baby or a child, but um, never really got into the books, I have to say. Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I think Aragorn he is your, I suppose, archetypical leader, isn't he? Uh, I mean, there's another question here around. He's tall, he's strong, he's good looking, he's got all these kind of manly qualities. So in that
mhm,
respect, he's a very old fashioned type of leader. He's a lot of what he does is at the end of a sword. So he kills a lot of. There's
yeah,
a big body count there. I mean,
yeah,
they're only orcs. It's true, but still.
this is true. But
Um, so he's quite brutal. But yeah, he has all these admirable qualities. So yeah, I think he is a classic leader, really.
yeah. How about all right? Let's go opposite with that, but
Yeah,
also a good leader, Hermione Granger.
yeah. Now, when you said
What do
that, I
you
thought that's fascinating. So tell us why Hermione's a good leader.
All right. Well, yeah. So, again, we always focus on Harry Potter
Hmm.
and his situation, but of course, his two cohorts definitely have an integral role in that.
Mm,
But I think she was very resourceful and obviously very intelligent. That quiet intelligence, I think, maybe, and a dedication to justice. So I think when you think about somebody who's a leader doesn't necessarily have to have the captain's badge if we want to
mm,
go back to Star Trek, but it
yeah.
could be somebody that by their qualities they're able to do things very powerfully and motivate others and also help their friends. Help in this case, I'm not saying we don't have friends as leaders, but help our department, help the people that we're in charge of. And it could be a different way of doing it, not with a sword,
Mm.
as in Lord of the Rings, but with her being able to lead and do it in a different way, through the intelligence, but having that intelligence guided by the passion that you have to do what's right and do what's just.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. And when my daughter was young, reading the books and watching the films, Hermione obviously was her favourite, and I think that was really good for her. So there was a young female character that she could look up to and think, I could be like that. I could aspire to that sort of character. So I really appreciate that and the writing of that character. And she is clearly the leader of the three. She is the leader.
Mhm.
Although, as you say, the
Yeah,
story is around Harry Potter and all of that. He definitely defers to her judgment most of the time,
yeah.
because she's the one who has the smarts, if you like. She can evaluate the issue. She can think about what needs to be done, and she tends to be the one that drives the actions of the rest of the group. So yeah, total spot on. Actually, that is, yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah. So I just I find it fascinating, isn't it? It's interesting how you can look into the entertainment world
Mm.
and literature and fiction, and obviously these writers are channeling maybe what they see as good and bad leadership. I mean, because
It's
like
very influential.
there's some bad examples in Harry
Mm.
Potter. Too. I was thinking about Dolores Umbridge.
Oh yeah.
uh, yeah, I was like, would you ever want to work for a boss who's full of authoritarianism,
Mm.
cruelty, and a disregard for the well-being of the people? I felt like that was her her mo was to spread discontent as widely as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good example. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking about when you said about writers and also art, culture and art. I mean, obviously, there's a feedback mechanism here. There's the writers themselves will have opinions about leadership, and but there's also other considerations like what makes a good story, and
Mhm.
where we can get the action in, and all those things as well. So it's not a pure leadership lesson, but that they clearly have their own opinions about it. And I was thinking about the changes over the years. If you, I've never read the Odyssey, but my daughter did some classics at university, and she talks about the Odyssey, and you think about those old myths and legends and so on, the characters
Mhm.
there, and then even just going back 50 or so years to the original Star Trek compared to the latest iterations of Star Trek. What changes are there that you've seen that we can kind of identify in what is considered to be good leadership?
Well, I mean, I go back to Captain Kirk. Almost that. There was a TV show not really talking about leadership, but that '60s stereotype Mad Men.
Oh
Like you
yeah.
got
Mm,
the drinking, smoking, womanizing
yeah.
guy leader and everything, and we know that's just not the way things should be.
Mm,
But it was like Kirk was definitely in that womanizing role,
mm,
part of that, and maybe that fit the '60s what people expected to see on TV. And I appreciate now, especially recently, we have a lot more. Um, I guess focus on the power that women have and also their leadership skills because our gender has nothing to do with how good of a leader we are. It's totally removed from that, and it's nice to see that because they always say, "Oh, men are the leaders," and it's like, yeah, I understand where you're coming with that, but it was
Mm.
just you know different maybe in that way. Even though Gene was very open minded with his writing back in the '60s, I mean, he did some really groundbreaking stuff. We just see now with the recent uh, entertainment, especially with Star Trek, they've definitely opened it up.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the original Star Trek, those three series, I mean, some of the comments are breathtaking, really, around
That's the way to put
um,
it.
gender roles and so on. It's like, oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean that has changed a lot. Be interesting to get a woman's perspective on this. Maybe at some point we get a guest,
yeah.
and we can ask that question. But
You
I
ask
know,
Celine what she thinks about this.
yeah, I have asked her actually. I mean, she's very interested in the topic. She also loves Star Trek,
Yeah,
so she can watch these older ones, but obviously there's a there's a gasp every now and again. When certain
yeah,
things are said.
yeah.
Um, they broke barriers. That we know about the first interracial kiss. We know about the fact that there were women on the bridge, but still, Uhura was, I mean, groundbreaking for its
Mhm.
day. But basically, she was the telephone operator, and that is, was really as far as it went, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Um,
they definitely, and I hope I don't. I keep worrying about getting attacked by the Star Trek purists and everything, but I actually like the first movie they redid. It was in 2009, with the new Star Trek, kind of like a reboot, if as it
yeah,
were.
I liked it. Yeah,
But they gave Uhura a more powerful role in
yeah.
that, and you could see how the dynamic changed on the bridge
Mm.
and how everybody worked with each other. They definitely they carried the original series modernization of it, I guess you could say. So yeah, I liked it. I have friends at work that are like, "I can't believe you like that. It's terrible. It's
Yeah, I
awful." And I'm
know.
like, "I like the way the Enterprise looks."
I
But
mean, I was so excited. Even now, there's a DVD that yes, I still use DVDs. There's a DVD that I've got of another film, and there's the advert for Star Trek, that the first reboot, and
Mhm.
it just gives me goosebumps even now, just
Yeah,
watching that. It's like, because they're engineering the Enterprise. You see that.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, it's just absolutely exciting. So yeah, I love the first one. I must say I didn't like the last film,
yeah.
with the new crew. I just found it didn't really do anything for me. But yeah, I like
Mhm.
the first one very much. Yeah, but I think, I know there's a there is a lot of politics around Star Trek now.
Mhm.
There's lots of people who seem to think that Star Trek's being taken over by the woke mob,
Yeah.
and they're not very happy about some of the messaging and the
Mhm.
diversity and so on, which I find strange in many ways, because Star Trek has always, as we've said, it's always pushed that envelope, whether you agree with everything or not.
Oh,
It's always
the
been doing that.
hate mail that's was it CBS or whoever got back when Kirk kissed Uhura. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly,
there was like death threats and things like that. So
exactly.
it's
Yeah,
interesting. We live in the present and we forget about that the past had similar
absolutely.
reactions.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I mean, but if you're looking at leadership as a whole, I find it fascinating because leadership has to it sometimes be edgy. It has to break the boundaries. There has to be some creativity with leadership because if you just do the old stale classic leadership 101, it's not going to work right for everybody. You have to be able to be flexible for the situations. Have your center point, I guess,
Mm,
where you're like, hey, this is where I'm going to go back to. But when you're dealing with different personalities and different situations that come up, whatever it may be, that's why I like Star Trek as an example because of the fact that it shows us that you don't have to use a one size fits all approach,
mm,
which
yeah.
is where they've gotten away from. Kirk was that kind of one size fits all, but Even Captain Jean-Luc Picard, he was able to rely on other leaders such as Riker or the Doctor or whoever it may be in order to get what needed to be done and accomplished. So,
yeah, I think our modern leaders are more like Spock than they are Kirk. I mean, that would be my slightly risque or slightly controversial assertion. I think we now value what Spock brings to leadership more than we perhaps value what Kirk does, at least in theory. In practice, maybe that's different, so you would say Kirk was your typical charismatic sort of leader. His confidence and his self-belief, I suppose, is part of that package. Whereas Spock brings rational thinking, problem solving, intelligence to the table. And for me, he was more of what I would consider to be a modern leader than Kirk. But, if you think about politics or you think about other areas, then still people seem to go for leaders who have that charismatic sort of ability to, sort of create this vision, even if it's an unrealistic one. They seem able to get people to follow them. So it's quite interesting, actually. I think there is a gap between what we see in industry and what we see in the political sphere, if you think about leadership.
Yeah, it's so true. I like how you keep bringing up Spock, because what I appreciate about that dynamic between him and Kirk is that not only were they friends, but they kind of checked each other. And that's where you need that in leadership. It may not be in the leadership structure where you can have somebody who's an equal cohort to you, who you can banter off of and say good cop, bad cop.
Yeah.
But if you get into a position where you have that, I don't want to say absolute authority, but you kind of reign free, then the danger is that you have nobody to check yourself.
Yeah.
So you either have to be in the position where you're willing to receive feedback from the ones that you lead and be able to take it openly and honestly and not feel retaliatory towards them, or what may be, but also, or have somebody that perhaps is in an equal position somewhere else that you can bounce ideas off of. But I always apprecited Spock and Kirk didn't always agree or get along with what needed to be done, but you need that resistance, you need that turmoil, yin and yang, if you want to call it that, to be able to do what's best. It helps refine you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And despite Kirk's strength of personality, he did listen to Spock and others. So yeah, I think that is a good example as well. Yeah. Cool. Well, we've managed to talk about that topic for nearly an hour.
How about that?
I could have gone on really, but so very interesting. If you as a listener want us to sort of get into other fictional leadership and management examples, and we're happy to take suggestions. I think they are a cultural representation of where the people writing at the time see us as a species, I suppose, and that includes the way we lead each other. So it's a great window into what we think leadership should be at whatever time it was written. So yeah, it gives us some insight, I think.
Yeah, very well said.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, and have a nice holidays. Thank you very much for talking today, Jared, and thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in. Don't forget to do the likey thing on that little tick there. Subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and make some comments, because we'd like to see a few more comments on there, and then we can sort of interact with you. So, and also if you've got any topics you'd like us to cover, then by all means suggest them. Bye for now.
See you later.